Hey, hello to another episode of The Limitless Show. In this week's episode, my guest and I will be talking about how to handle change. If that interests you, then definitely carry on listening. I'm really excited to introduce my guest today because I've watched a lot of his content, I've heard a lot of his content, and he has so many valuable things to say. And I was really interested to talk to him about this topic of change because he says he's going through a lot of change himself. So it'd be really interesting to hear his opinion on how he's handling that change. My wonderful guest, Dan Voss. Hello, Dan.
Hi, Emily. Thank you so much for having me.
No, I'm so excited to talk to you. Thank you for being here. So for anyone who has not watched an episode of The Limitless Show before, it's all about bringing a new guest every single week, and we talk about a limitation they've had in their life or are having in their life and how they're overcoming it, in the hopes that if someone else is struggling with the same thing, what we say on this episode may help someone else. So I spoke to you before this and you said you'd like to talk about handling change in life, because you're going through quite a lot of change at the moment. So what I want to ask first is, how can change limit a person? How can you be limited by change?
I don't know if change itself is something that necessarily limits somebody. I mean, I guess you can definitely be limited by change if you allow it to, like if you allow that fear of change take over. Because look, like when you go through change and it limits you, it's likely coming from fear. And that fear is likely coming from the fact that you don't know what's coming next, right? It's that element of the unknown that I think leads to fear. So I think that's the one thing that maybe would limit somebody when it comes to change, that they just don't know, what's coming next. And that's just kind of like a primal human instinct. We want to know that we're safe and secure and we're comfortable. And as soon as that is taken away from us, I think that's where fear kind of sets in. I guess that would be like the main thing that maybe would limit somebody. But in my opinion, change doesn't have to be that way. It can actually be a really good thing, a beautiful thing. And it might seem scary at first, it might seem very terrifying because, like I said, it's that element of unknown. But as soon as you can get past that, you might realize that change was the best thing that happened to you. For example, if somebody lost their job, they might kind of freak out at first, right? Because they don't have that paycheck anymore. Maybe that job was kind of their like sense of identity. So it's scary, right? Especially this year when so many people are being furloughed or laid off or, losing their job or losing their business, that's a really scary thing. But if you take a step back and realize that maybe that was the best thing to happen to you, then all of a sudden that change is no longer scary. It's no longer limiting. Because let's face it, most people hate their job, at least in America. If you ask, majority of people are just not happy at work. So maybe that was a blessing in disguise, that you were laid off and now you can actually go explore and be who you really want to be. That's kind of where I'm at. And for me personally, like when I talk about change with career or business, I'm going through that right now, right? With my business, even before everything going on in 2020. Well, I guess I should start off by giving you some context of what my business is. So I've had a wedding photography business for the last three years and some change. And it's been amazing. It's been an incredible business that has provided me an income, full-time living, something that I enjoy. Been able to be creative with that work. But really in the last 3 to 6 months of 2019, I started realizing that the same passion that I had before in that career path was missing. And I probably experienced some burnout, which is pretty common in the wedding industry. You're working every single weekend, just about every single Saturday. You're missing out on family events, friends, and social gatherings. It got to a point where I was working, I think I did almost 30 weddings in 2019. And at the very end of the year, I was like, wow, this is a lot. Like this maybe isn't exactly what I thought I signed up for. So even before everything in 2020, which totally shook my world, I was already having some thoughts of some change there with my career and my business. And then 2020 happened. And I remember like that first few weeks of the shutdown and everything, and getting one email from a couple that I was supposed to shoot their wedding in March of 2020. And I remember them emailing me saying, with everything going on right now, what if we have to postpone or cancel our wedding? And that in like the wedding world is like unheard of. Like you don't have weddings that are canceled or postponed. Like it's very, very rare.
You hope it doesn't happen anyway, don't you?
You hope it doesn't happen, right? Because it usually means that the couple split up, and that's like really sad and tragic. So it's very, very rare. So when they emailed me that, I was like, oh my God, this is real. Like, I don't think this is going to be the first wedding that this happens. And then sure enough, week after week, just more and more weddings postponed and canceled. I think I had 24 weddings booked for 2020, and pretty much all of those evaporated overnight. You're talking about $100,000 income of revenue for the year, and pretty much goes away overnight. So, but then I take a step back and I realize, you know what, maybe this is meant to be. I was already having thoughts of possibly getting out of this business and moving on to something else, and maybe that's a sign in the right direction.
I just want to point out from the start, you've already made some brilliant points, and I'm so glad we're talking about this, because like you said, with COVID there is so much change happening for so many different people. So I think it's a really important topic to talk about, on how to overcome this kind of limitation. But like you said at the start, change itself is not a limitation. Sometimes it's a blessing in disguise. The thing that is the limitation in this video is the way that you perceive change, the way your attitude is towards change. Basically, you really answered my next question, which was, what change are you going through right now?
Yeah.
So thanks for answering it anyway. But I would love to know, how are you dealing with this change, other than telling yourself and kind of thinking maybe this is a blessing in disguise, maybe this is meant to be? Because I definitely know in my life, when things haven't gone the right way, or say I didn't get into the school that I wanted to, it's been a blessing in disguise. That change has been a blessing because it's put me on the path of who I am now. If I was doing what I wanted to when I was 18 years old, I wouldn't be doing this. So yes, it is a blessing in disguise, but how are you overcoming this change in your life, this kind of moving from doing what you are right now to doing what you want to do? How are you dealing with that change?
Yeah, before I answer that question, I do want to give one other piece of information here, just in case any of my wedding couples are listening to this. I don't want them to worry that I'm like not going to show up on their wedding day, in the next year here, because I've already had I think 15 or 16 weddings from 2020 moved to 2021. So it's not like I'm just like wrapping up the business and like never shooting a wedding ever again. So my heart's still in it when it comes to showing up on the wedding day and producing great images. I mean, obviously, like, it's something I still enjoy, and it's something I may still continue on after 2021, but probably on a smaller scale. So anyhow, I just wanted to get that little caveat out there in case any of my couples are listening. Don't want them to freak out. But how am I dealing with the change right now? I think for me, it's really important that I just focus on self-care. And the reason why I say that is because that's like the business side of things in my career. That's not the only change I'm going through right now. There is that, but then there's also part of me is trying to figure out, like, who am I and who do I want to be, and what do I really love in life, and what kind of lifestyle do I want to live? So I think some of that is just like soul searching, I guess, if you want to put it that way, or trying to find my identity. And then just another piece of information in terms of other change I'm going through right now. Recently broke up with my girlfriend a couple weeks ago. We broke up, and that was heartbreaking, right? Like, a breakup is really hard. And it's still fresh, right? It just literally happened about 2 weeks ago, and it's been a tough couple weeks. There's moments that are very difficult. There's days that are really difficult. But for me, I think it's super important to focus on that self-care. What does that look like? For me, it looks like exercising more. A lot of this stuff sounds really basic, but it helps, right? Like, eating better. It's amazing how much, if you eat healthier, how much that affects your mood. I've been going on long walks every day, in the morning. That's my first thing I do. It's kind of like my morning routine now. I make my cup of coffee and I just go out for like a half-hour walk. If you want, I can kind of break down that too, because I feel like that routine has been so important and powerful for me to get through a lot of this change.
I think as well, when you have that morning routine, there is this sense of still security amongst the change, which can really help people. So I'd love for you to go through that morning routine.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I think that's why I enjoy the morning routine so much, is because it gives me that sense of consistency and stability, security, and like everything that you need when you are going through a lot of change. It's like that counterbalance. So for me, it's been really nice. Just like I said, I make a cup of coffee, I go out for a walk, but I listen to calming music and I'm outside. You know, I live in a big city. I'm in Chicago. So there's a lot going on here in terms of like big city feel, but you can still find nature in a big city. I'm fortunate enough to live by a few parks. So I can actually go to the park and just like walk around or sit at the bench. And it's just nice to be out in fresh air and have that sense of nature. I think is super important as well. And then in terms of like my mindset, right? Because like for me, that's a time where I can get my mindset right for the day. And what that looks like is I reflect on things that I'm grateful for. So even in periods of change and adversity and challenging times, you can always find things to be grateful for. I actually, an uncle of mine he's passed away a number of years ago, he always said that no matter how hard life gets, there's always somebody out there that has it worse than you. And that really comes down to perspective, right? Like if I'm struggling from my breakup or I'm trying to figure out what to do with my career, somebody else has got it worse, unfortunately, but they do. Like they may be going through a messy divorce, or they may be, you know, maybe they just lost a loved one. I mean, people are going through some like really tough times. The worst thing that's happening to me right now is that my girlfriend broke up with me and I'm trying to figure out what to do with my business. It could always be worse. So I think that's a big thing, you know, in that mindset. So anyhow, I'm kind of going off tangent here, but with gratitude, I think that kind of just centers you and puts things into perspective. And then from there, I just like to kind of like think through like, what do I want to get accomplished for the day? That just like puts me in a good mindset of like, these are the things I'm going to accomplish today, even if it's just one thing.
No, I love that. And I love that you've kind of based your morning routine around what you need. Like that
Yes.
gratitude helps you for the change that you're going through right now, to help you realize that what you're going through is hard, but you know, you've got things to be grateful for. That exercise is something that keeps you, you know, healthy in yourself, and
Yep.
the change, it's really important. I love that you've based it around what you need. And I think that's the importance of a morning routine. It doesn't have to be the same way as everyone else. I'm trying to find my own morning routine right now, but I know a friend and she bases it around self-love and self-care because that's what she needs, and confidence because that's what she needs. So I'm really learning a lot about morning routines, and I think it's really important to set your day up straight. But with what you've just said, and I think was it your uncle who said it about someone worse? What I do want to say with that is so right. And I always put myself in that position because there's always someone worse who's actually bossing life as well. There's always someone like who has it twice as worse, but that still does not mean that what you're going through is not validated. It
Exactly.
still doesn't mean that you need to feel sorry for yourself or like, oh, other people are doing it, why can't I? Like, you still have a right to be a bit nervous, be a bit sad. Like, you still have
Absolutely.
that right, but it's not dwelling in that kind of, you know, that pain.
Yeah, I don't think it like undermines anything that you personally are going through, because whatever you are going through, I'm sure it's very difficult and it needs time and attention and care. I do think though that when you put that into perspective, it helps. Like, yeah, it's unfortunate that somebody else out there has got it worse, but at least it makes me feel like, okay, you know what, I can get my shoes on today and I can go out there and I can do this. So I think at the very least it helps put things into perspective and kind of at least push you through and get you into the right direction.
So the next thing I want to ask, and I'm really about mindset, my channel's a lot to do with mindset.
Yeah.
Said a lot of things already, like obviously realizing that there's people worse than you, the mindset that what you're going through, maybe it's a blessing in disguise. Is there any other kind of mindset shifts or things that you've been telling yourself to help you get through this change?
Yeah, I think I'm doubling down here on the idea of gratitude. So with gratitude, in terms of like a practical step or tip that I actually implement in my life, I have on my phone, you can set an alarm and actually customize the text that like what reads on that alarm. So every morning at 9:30, I have an alarm that goes off. It's just meant to be a reminder, but the alarm will go off, and then on my phone is the text that I have written in there. And that text reads, "God gave me another day." And I'm not sure how much you follow in England. I think it was followed quite a bit across the world when Kobe Bryant died. That week that Kobe died, I don't know what it was. Like, obviously celebrities die, like we all do. When certain celebrities die, like it might be sad and you're like, oh no, it was like a rock star that I really loved and, you know, whatever, like it might be a little sad. But for some reason, Kobe, I think it was just like the sense of tragic that the whole thing was, like the fact that he was like 42, I think, and his daughter was with them. I mean, there's like 7 or 8 other people on that helicopter. I mean, it was just so tragic. And Kobe's obviously an icon. Like, so many people respected him and looked up to him and admired his work on and off the court. So that week, I just felt this like sense of sadness, but also gratitude that I was alive. Like, every morning I remember waking up and like the first thought that came to my head was, holy cow, like I have another day. And that might sound cliche, but if you think about it, every single day that we are given is a gift, right? Like, we are not guaranteed tomorrow. That week I started doing that. That was back in January. So for the last 8 months or so, I have every single day it goes off and it says, God gave me another day. And in that moment, I just said to myself, like, whatever I'm stressed about or angry about or down about or whatever change is, you know, making me fearful, I see that and it's like, you know what, this is incredible. I have another 24 hours to live here. I think if we kind of just get in that mindset on a regular basis, it's super powerful. So that's kind of one thing. And then I guess just to go along that same line of thought, and I'll credit Gary V on this, Gary Vaynerchuk, he talks about it quite a bit of like, obviously gratitude, but he's mentioned a handful of times, there's a stat out there, it's called, it's 400 trillion to 1. And there's actual like scientists and doctors and researchers that they kind of studied the odds of being born, right? So if you think about like, in order to be born, your parents had to meet. And their both sets of parents had to meet and their parents had to meet. So the fact that like all of these things lined up and all these people met and had a family and then eventually came down to you being born, they found that number, that statistic, it's the odds of being born and being born healthy and like actually living on this earth, it's 400 trillion to 1, which is just like mind-boggling to think about how lucky and how blessed we are to just live on this earth. So those are some of the things I like to kind of center myself and reflect on.
Yeah. No, I love that. I always say that as well. Like, it's, what are the odds? It's crazy. And then again, like, I know 400 trillion to 1 is like massive odds, but then what are the odds of us even meeting? What are the odds of the friendships and the experiences that you have? Like, be grateful for everything that comes into your life. Yes. I love that. Yeah. Another mindset shift that I have to change as well, and I often have to tell myself this, is I can handle whatever comes my way. And I have to, like, affirmation, I have to repeat that to myself, because everything in my life that has happened up to now, I've handled it with it. I have dealt with 100% of my worst days. I have gone through a lot of like horrible stuff, like my dad passed away, my cousin passed away, like, and I've handled that, so I can handle this as well. And I think it's a really great affirmation to have in your head, that whatever happens, I can handle it, because a lot of the things is the unknown. But if you have this underlying belief in yourself that whatever happens, I can handle it, it gives you this like sense of power as well within yourself.
Yeah, no, I think that's super important. A lot of that comes down to self-confidence, and a lot of it comes down to like what I've been focusing on in terms of like mindset, is just that self-care. And I guess just to give you another example of like things that I've been doing to handle change and get through it all, is journaling. And that's kind of been part of that morning routine when I go out on the walk, is like I have some journal prompts. I actually interviewed, his name is Dr. Benjamin Hardy. He's an author and I believe he's a psychologist. And so he came on to my podcast. He has a recently launched book. I think it's called Personality Isn't Permanent. And he has some journal prompts in that book. And I've been using those to kind of just journal. And his whole thing, like with that book, the premise of the book is that your personality is not permanent. Like, it can actually be changed. You can actually grow and develop and picture your future self of who you want to be. So that's, you know, a lot of those journal prompts is what I've been focusing on, is like, who do I really want to be? Who do I want to be in 5 years? Where do I want my life to be? What do I want to accomplish? And I think by going through those things, it helps you. That's another thing, is like with change and fear, so much of that is based on the past or even the present, but usually it's the past experiences. And if we can take ourselves away from that, You can learn from the past. You can take whatever it is that happened to you and learn from it. But don't always live in that moment. Don't always live in that past moment. Like, just move on from there and project yourself into the future. And I think that is super helpful when you can kind of shift that mindset from the past to either the future, or what I really like is focusing on the present moment. That is where real beauty is, when you can truly be in the moment, in the present, and you're not worried about what happened in the past. You're not worried about what's going to happen tomorrow. You're just really just truly present in that moment. I think that's where you find pure happiness.
There's this great quote where it says, if you're spending too much time in the past, you're probably depressed. If you spend too much time in the future, you're probably anxious. So
sorry, that was my alarm that just went off for God gave me another day.
Oh, I love
that. I forgot to turn that off our recording. Sorry about that.
No, don't turn it off. You need to
That was good timing. We were just talking about it. I'm sorry. Can you say that quote again? If you live in the past,
if you spend too much time in the past, you're probably depressed, and if you spend too much time in the future, you're probably anxious. So yeah, it is really about spending time in that present moment.
Yeah, I love that.
And also, one last thing on mindset to do with this, just being in control of what you can control. The most scary thing that people have found within this time is that they can't control things. But the things you can't control things. You can only control yourself, your attitude, your feelings, your thoughts. And that's what you've got to control. You can't control these outer sources. You can't control a hurricane. You can't control anything out of you. But when you realize so much you can actually control, you start to be more centered, more grounded. You feel better because there's so much more you can actually control. So focus on things you can control.
Yeah, I think it's so powerful. I was just listening to Lewis Howes. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Lewis Howes. He has a podcast. It's called The School of Greatness. He's somebody I look up to. I talk about him quite a bit in my podcast. He was talking yesterday. I'm in his inner circle. It's like you can pay X amount of money every month to have added benefits and videos and webinars and stuff. And so yesterday's call, he was talking about everything happening in 2020. We're now in this mindset, at least a lot of people are, that we just have to survive, right? Just get through 2020 and I can't wait for this year to be over. And we already know it. As soon as 2021 hits, New Year's Eve of this upcoming New Year's Eve, everyone's gonna be like, oh, good riddance, 2020. It's over. Thank God we got through it. We survived. And he was saying why do we have to be in that mindset? Why? Yeah, it's bad. There's been so much bad in 2020, but we have 4 months left of this year and we still have so much more that we can control. So he was talking about getting out of that survive mindset and get into the thrive mindset, right? That comes down to adaptability, right? Dealing with change, we have to adapt. What's happened has happened. We have to just accept what has happened, and we have to adapt and like you said, control what we can control and make the best of these next 4 months of 2020 and get out of that survival mindset and get into the thrive mindset that I'm going to accelerate and I'm going to do better. I'm going to grow and I'm going to set myself up for success in 2021.
Yeah. And when you get into that thrive mindset, what I found is you start to find solutions because you're not so fixated on all the problems. You're not so fixated on what has 2020 become. You're fixated on, yes, this is what it is, but what can I do with it? I'm so my heart goes to everyone who's lost people, who have gone through strife and struggle. But I personally, and I'm not going to be ashamed of it, I've used it for myself. I've used this time that I've been on furlough to organize my business, to try and do as many videos as I can, connect with people like you. And it's about kind of figuring things out. I read this book recently called Everything is Figure-Outable. And it really is. It might not be figured out to what you wanted it to be, but it can be something similar. And it can even be something better. But you've got to have that mindset of things are figure-outable if you look for the solution rather than dwell in the problem. And like you said, there's 4 months left. Why do you want to waste 4 months of your life? Why do you want to waste that away? Like you said as well, you never know when you're going to die. You never know if you're going to wake up in the morning. Every day is given as a gift. So why would you want to waste these next 4 months? Try and thrive. Try and do what you can.
Yeah, it's so true. And I did something similar as yourself. Like I mentioned, my wedding business, my main source of income, March, April, that time period, it just dried up overnight. So I figured, okay, I'm going to have a lot of free time here for the next several months. And what better time for me? I started a health podcast. What better time to talk about health than during a global pandemic? So that's what I did. And I've been having a lot of fun with it. And that's where I'm like, okay, maybe this is a kind of a career path. Maybe this is something I can actually do with my life and make a living from it. Yeah, I think it, like you said, it comes down to just taking what we can control and making the most of it, and then accepting what we cannot control, and just accepting that as well.
So we've spoken a lot about mindset. Is there any ways that you've come across practically, other than like your morning routine, to handle the change that you're going through? Is there any other practical kind of steps?
In terms of like, I guess this is more down the road of mental health. I found great joy and incredible results with meditation, something I've been doing probably for a little over 5 years. I feel like that really centers me and sets me up really nicely for the day, to the point where like if I meditate in the morning, later on in the day I just can feel it. Like I know it's a day that I've meditated, because I feel more grounded. Like I'm not, my mind's not racing, I'm not worrying about things that I normally would. So I think meditation is a big one for me. I've also recently gotten into, this is kind of more of like practical, like not therapy, but like in some ways it can be therapeutic. Anyhow, what I've been working on, it's called Wim Hof method. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Wim Hof.
No.
He's from the Netherlands. His nickname is the Iceman. Definitely look him up. He's somebody I've been really following quite a bit in the last year or so. And he's best known for kind of developing, and he didn't even really develop it. I think he did, but he like basically these breathing techniques, which have been around for probably hundreds, if not thousands of years. He kind of just like pieced it all into like one nice package and like normalized the whole idea of breath work. And so if your listeners want to look him up, they can just go to his website, or he got an app as well. Basically that technique, the actual breathing technique, is you want to lay down or sit down and you do 30 deep breaths. And we were actually talking about doing breath work, before our recording here. So you do 30 deep breaths and then you hold your breath for as long as you can. And it sounds scary, and you actually have to be careful with it. You want to make sure you do it in a safe way, preferably, especially those first few times, have somebody else in the room. And there's a few other disclaimers, if you have certain conditions, if you have epilepsy, like there's certain things that you want to avoid if you have those conditions. But for most people, you can give it a try. And for me, it's been so powerful of stress relief. Basically, just I don't know all the science behind it to be upfront with you, but what it basically does is you're basically pouring oxygen into your body, right? You're just feeding your cells with as much oxygen as you can. That's why you have those 30 like really deep breaths, and then you're holding your breath. And for me, like I can do about 1.5 to 3 minutes. Basically, it's just kind of like reigniting your central nervous system. And then he also has a bunch of like cold therapy. So you can do cold showers or ice baths. And that's kind of what he started off with, was like that exposure to really extreme cold. Like I think this guy's done like a half marathon in the Himalayas, or so, like somewhere really cold with like nothing but shorts on, like no shoes, no shirt. And it's just like all ice. And he just ran like a half marathon in this like extreme cold weather. He's known for all kinds of other like things like that. But that's something that I've been doing, and it has been really profound, like for just my well-being. I can tell I'm like more energetic, like how like late afternoon you might have like a little bit of grogginess, you might need that like afternoon cup of coffee. You're just like, maybe I could use a nap. Like I don't have any of that anymore. Like I have full energy up until I go to bed, and it's incredible. So that's kind of one big thing that I'm really focusing on. Not even sure if that answered your question.
Yeah, no, it does. That's something practical towards how to deal with change. No, it's something I definitely need to look into. I get to like 1 p.m, 2 p.m, and I'm like, I need a nap. So
right. Yeah.
Well,
just to give you a little bit more information on like why I think that is important for dealing with like stress, anxiety, change, fear, what that all does, like his entire methodology is that it connects us back with ourselves, right? Like it connects us to nature, and it connects us back to us as a human being. And if you think about it, like the world we live in there's many beautiful things in it, but there's also so many things that we have created that is just like so disaligns with who we are supposed to be as human beings, right? Like technology is a beautiful thing, but I would argue that most people spend way too much time on technology, on social media, in front of the TV, watching movies, in front of the computer. Like we have a lot of screen time, and what his whole mindset is like, we don't spend enough time in nature, and we don't spend enough time on breath work and just like centering ourselves back to being a human being. So I think once you start practicing all these things and learn more about it, you can kind of see that.
That's brilliant. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
So the next question I want to ask is, I don't really know your story, and that's fair. But what I want to ask is there a difference between change as in perceived change? So something like with your work, you wanted to change it, and sudden change. So for instance, I don't know if it is something sudden that happened with your relationship. Is there a difference with how you handle both perceived change and sudden change?
I don't know if there is, for me personally, a difference of how I would handle it. Like those two examples, with career change and making changes in my business, some of that's perceived, but some of it's at the end of the day real change. Like it's not so sudden. It's a little bit more like over time, like stuff that I can reflect on and like actually make decisions of like what I really want. Whereas like a breakup, that is sudden, right? Like that's, especially if you're the one that's being dumped, like that's unexpected and it's just like overnight, and that's difficult. So I guess you can deal with it in different ways, right? Like if it's something that's a little bit longer over time, like I said, you can like reflect on it more and really think through like what it is that I want. So like example of me just like figuring out who I am and what my identity is, I am going to deal with that a little bit differently because it's something that I have a little bit more control over, right? It goes back to the control and not control. I have a little bit more control over like where I want to go and like what direction I want to go in. But now that I'm saying that out loud, I guess you could say the same thing about sudden change, like a heartbreak. It's tough in that moment, but like I still have control over it. Like I have control over my reaction and like how I get through it. Like I didn't have control over the breakup, but I have control over how do I live my life now. Like am I gonna lay in bed all day and like under the covers and like watch Netflix and eat ice cream, which I did some of that first day or two after the breakup. But once you get past that, you're like, okay, I got to move on with my life, and I have bills to pay, and I have to make money here, and I have to go out and live my life and spend time with people that I love. And that's the other thing is like, in terms of coping with any kind of change, whether it's perceived or sudden, I would say like just center yourself around really good people, whether that's in your family or friends or even a stranger like yourself, like you and I just met an hour ago, and we're having a beautiful conversation. Like just center yourself around good people. And I think that can really help.
Yeah, no, I love that. Yeah, center yourself around good people. No, that's just really like connected with me.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about how many people, and not to like be judgmental or like put shame on people, but think about how many people we have in our lives that may not be healthy, and like they might be negative, they might be toxic, but like we just kind of let them linger. Like maybe it's a friend from childhood or whoever, and you were always like friends, so you feel like you're indebted to them to like always be their friend. But if they're not healthy to your relationship, like we have, again, going back to control, like we have that control to say like, okay, I want these people in my life, or I want these people in my life. And it's kind of common knowledge now that like you become the product of like the 5 people that you spend the most time around. I believe that's so true. Like if you spend your time around good people that are healthy, they exercise, they eat right, they just live like good values, you're likely gonna like kind of become that. Or on the other end of the spectrum, if you're around negative people that just don't take care of themselves, they're always complaining, you're likely going to fall into that as well. So I think that's also a super important thing to keep in mind, is like who we spend time with is really important.
That is a great quote. I say it in a lot of my videos. You are the average of 5 people you spend time with. Jim Rohn. Great quote. Brilliant one.
Yeah.
Also with perceived change and sudden change, sometimes sudden change is good for us, because perceived change, we can be scared of the unknown and then not make that change. Whereas sometimes things are just put on us and we have to adapt straight away. And I'm reading a book at the moment, and it keeps saying the quote that change is hard in the beginning, messy in the middle, and wonderful in the end. Sometimes we are so scared of that unknown, of that change, that we don't do anything about it. And we never know that wonderfulness of what could actually happen. Whereas with sudden change, it's like, bam, deal with it.
Yep. Yeah. I mean, just to give you, like, I've been talking about my recent breakup quite a bit here. Maybe this is just like a therapy session for me here, but it's been good. I feel better. But just to go back to that, like, I wasn't the one that ended that relationship. So that was sudden change, right? Like, it was a 2-year relationship, and we loved each other and like cared about each other and like had great times together. But now that it's happened, like that breakup has happened and it's over, like I can look back and realize like maybe there were moments where I realized like that wasn't going to work out, and I just like buried that thought because I convinced myself that she was the one and that this was going to be the right fit and that we love each other and we're meant to be together. But along the way there were certain things where I was like, that doesn't look good, that might be a red flag. Like, but you bury all those things because you try to convince yourself that like this is going to be a perfect fit, and maybe it's not. So like, going back to your point, like now that I'm getting through that, it's maybe I'm starting to realize things that I just kind of pushed away before. That also helps too with healing, right? Like it helps with the healing process of like, okay, that first few days was tough. Like it was a heartbreak. Now that I'm through that phase, I can look back and say, this might have been exactly what I needed.
We do that with our life, though. We're so like, we think this is going to be the path, like we're going to get this job and then it's going to lead to this, and then we're going to have that partner and it's going to lead to marriage and we're going to have kids and it's going to be, but life does throw things at you, like COVID. Life does throw things at you. And like I said, I think it's going back to that thought of control what you can control and have a belief that you can handle whatever comes your way. Like, things are going to be tricky, things are going to be tough, there's going to be some horrible things, but if you have that belief that you can handle it, then you're going to handle it. You will find a way. Definitely.
Exactly.
Brilliant. I love that. What else would you say to someone who's going through change right now?
I would say to realize, it kind of goes back to like projecting yourself like into your future self. Basically put yourself like in hindsight, right? Like it might take a year for you to kind of like really cope with that change and like accept it. It might take a month, it might take 5 years, but if you can just put yourself into that mindset of your future self, of whatever time that might be, where you are okay with that change, and you can actually look back and say, yeah, I learned from it. I grew from that, and I'm okay now. I'm actually better. I'm healthier, and I'm living a happier life. Because that, at the end of the day, is the goal. And if you can get there, you will look back at that period of change, that period of suffering, that period of adversity, and it's not going to make it necessarily easier, but you can at least look back and say, I got through it and I learned from it and I grew from it. And to me, that's about as good as you can get, as much as you can ask for, is that you learn from those experiences and you grow.
Honestly, I don't want this conversation to end. I like you all day. I think this has been a brilliant conversation.
It's been great. Yeah, I really enjoyed it.
Anything else? Last words other than that?
No, I would just say, like we've talked about, self-care is super important. I talk about it quite a bit on my podcast. I guess I can give myself a little plug here. My podcast is Health and Humanity, if anyone wants to check it out. We talk a lot of, obviously, health-related topics, better nutrition, better sleep, exercise, but just overall self-care and self-development. So I would say for anyone listening that might be going through any type of change, whether it's a breakup, whether it's a career move, they lost their job, they lost a loved one, whatever change you're going through, just stay focused on the important things in life. Like I said, surround yourself by good people, and just take that time for self-care, and realize that you'll get through it. And whenever that time is, whether it's a year or 5 years, you'll look back and realize that even in the moment of that change, it feels awful, it feels terrifying. It can be a beautiful thing. It can be something that you can learn from and help you grow.
Yeah, you can never connect the dots going forward, but once you're standing in the present looking back, you can always connect the dots and think, oh, that had to happen for that to happen. I had to meet that person, or have that heartbreak to meet that person. I had to go through that experience to become the person I am now, to do this thing that I'm doing or be with this person I'm being with. You've got to wait to that moment. Like, you can't figure it all out in this moment. You can't figure out everything. But in 5 years' time, you will be able to look and connect the dots and think, I learned from that. I grew from that. I did this, I did that. That was really tough, but now I can connect with all these people, and now I can be more vulnerable. Now I can share my story. Now I can help other people. So yeah, Try not to focus too much forwards and just be
Right.
present with yourself. And like
Yep.
you said, I think it's so important just to work on yourself. Like you said, right now, you're trying to find yourself. And even with that, I went through a phase where I was trying to find myself. I don't know if I like that phrase, and you can disagree with me, but I think it is about creating yourself. It's
Mm.
about creating the person you want to be. You
Yep.
don't necessarily find this person and think, oh, yep, I like that person. Being this
Yes.
person, you have to create yourself. You have to work on yourself. You have to work on your health. You have to work on who you are. You
Yes.
create that person. So that's why when people like go traveling and they think, oh, I'm trying to find myself, that's fine. Like people can do that. I did that. But also think about creating yourself, because
Yes.
you're more guaranteed to get to that person or be that person if you start doing the work and creating yourself rather than just finding it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you said so much there that I want to touch on. So the first piece is I don't like that phase of like finding yourself either. It goes back to fear and like fear of change. Like it's that element of unknown that is scary and it just doesn't feel right. Like it's just you feel insecure. So but to your point of like it's not about finding yourself, it's about creating yourself. That reminds me of exactly the whole idea of personality isn't permanent. You know, we can actually change and grow and develop over time and create that person that we want to be. And it's not necessarily about finding or discovering yourself. It's about creating the person that you want to be. So I think that's beautifully said.
If Dan has, inspired you like he has me today, I will definitely put all of his details to his podcast, all of his content, and everything that he's talked about today in the description below, because I think there's been a lot of content said that could definitely help a lot of the viewers. So
Yes.
if that interests you, please definitely read the description, because all of his details will be in the description below. Thank you
Awesome.
so much for being here, Dan. Thank you for being
Thank you.
on the show. And
Thanks,
to all
Emily.
of you, thank you so much for watching. If you've enjoyed this, please let us know by giving it a like, put a comment in the comments, pressing the subscribe, and hit that bell button so you never miss another episode of The Limitless Show. Thank you so much for watching. And Dan, once again, I appreciate you so much.
Thank you, Emily. This has been a real joy. Really appreciate it.
You're welcome.